Adam from the Army Painter Studio back again today with another tutorial. Today we're going to be painting up a model from Raging Heroes. This is Angel Ezeriel, the True Slayer. I can't wait to paint up this model. It has a really dynamic pose. It's going to allow me to show off a few new techniques. We're going to be using our Airbrush Medium, which is due out in stores in the next couple of days here, as well as the new Masterclass Drybrush range, which you can pre-order now. It is due out in September. I'm also going to be using some yet to be seen products. These are products that are in development here at the Army Painter. So this is a cool sneak peek behind the scenes as I get to test out some new products before they get to market for you today. So let's take a look at the paints that we're going to be using in this tutorial. You can find that we're going to be using a vast selection of paints from our War Paints range, our Quick Shade Wash range, and our Metallics range. I'm going to begin by painting up all of the armor on this Angel Ezeriel model, and I really want to go for a pearly white armor, really make her look regal. As we're painting this up, I am going to be using some new products that have yet to hit market, give you a behind the scenes look how we get to play and develop new products here at the Army Painter. Don't worry, you can replicate any of these ideas that we're going to be putting to model with the paints with standard acrylic paints from our War Paints range or our Metallics paints. So let's get right to it. And here she is, the Truth Sayer, the Angel Ezeriel from Raging Heroes. I really love this sculpt, such a dynamic pose. I'm really excited to get some paint on it. Now, I went ahead and primed the model using our airbrush and our gray primer through the airbrush, but you could save yourself some steps here by just using our color primer Skeleton Bone. I'm applying our base coat of Skeleton Bone through the airbrush using a 1 to 2 parts mix of our Airbrush Medium and our War Paints Skeleton Bone. I'm just going to apply this very evenly across all of the armor bits on the model. So the legs, the torso, the arms, and of course the robes, because we are going to be painting them in with yellow paint later on in this tutorial, and that's a perfect base coat for laying down that yellow paint. Once we finished up with Skeleton Bone, we're going to apply our first highlight, and for this we're going to be using Brain Matter Beige. Again, I'm going to apply this in the same fashion through the airbrush in a top-down manner. They call this a zenithal highlight, where all of the light will catch the raised areas and our skeleton bone will remain untouched in the lower parts and the shadows of the miniature. So in a 1 to 2 part ratio of Airbrush Medium and our War Paints, we're just going to apply this first highlight. Now we're going to bust out our brand new Masterclass dry brushes. Remember that these will be in stores this September, but the pre-order is open and available on our web store now. Now I'm just going to apply the matte white War Paint to the bristles, and I still have my nitrile glove on from the airbrushing stage. I'm just going to apply it to make sure I have the right amount of paint loaded onto the bristles of this Masterclass dry brush. I'm using a moderate brush here, and I'm just going to flick this matte white paint across the raised areas, make sure that I'm catching the raised areas. And this is kind of a pre-highlight. I'm going to apply a translucent metallic effect after I apply this highlight, but this is going to pick out all of those edges before I do that. Just be sure to get all of the areas, the raised areas on the model with this dry brush step. And here it is. This is a behind the scenes look. This is a new type of paint that we're prototyping. It is a metallic effects paint. It's a pearlescent effect, so it has some translucent properties. And I'm trying this actually for the very first time with you here on camera. I'm going to apply this through the airbrush, again, thin down using our magic ratio of 1 part Airbrush Medium to 2 parts of this metallic paint. And I'm just going to apply this all over evenly across all of the armored areas on the model. And you can see it's already giving a very cool pearlescent effect. Once that's done, it's time to apply a wash, and I had trouble deciding what wash I wanted to go with, but mid-brown is one that I don't get to use quite often, and I really love it because it has a nice rosy hue, and I figured that'd be really nice to complement the pearl armor on this model. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this right out of the bottle. I didn't thin this down any, but I'm just making sure that when I apply it, I'm allowing it to work its way into the recesses on the model. When you're done, give it about 15-20 minutes to dry, and then we can begin with the next step in this tutorial. Once it's had time to dry, I'm going back with that prototype metallic effects paint, and I'm going to apply this as a dry brush just to reinforce some of that pearlescent effect over top of the wash and build up some of the highlights that we had previously started earlier on in this tutorial. And you can see now I've got this very cool shiny pearlescent effect on the armor. It looks very angelic. I'm very happy with how this is turning out. Now you could achieve similar effects with different paints. You can use our shining silver paint over top of bone armor to get a very, very similar effect. But I wanted to give you guys a behind the scenes look as to how we test out new products that will eventually reach the market. I'm gonna let that dry brush dry for a second here, and I'm gonna begin blocking in all of the feathers on our Angel Ezeriel model. For this, I am using Wolf Gray. I am playing with tones here because I am going for a white wing effect, and I have kind of a white armor effect. I'm shifting the white spectrum. I have that rosy warm red in that ivory armor, and I'm gonna have a bluish gray on the wings here. So with very thin down paints, we're just gonna be sure that we apply this all over the wings. After applying a second coat of the Wolf Gray to the wings, I'm gonna let that dry, and I'm just taking some matte white and I'm picking out some of the more extreme highlights on the armor. You may be asking, why aren't you using a metallic paint here? Well, the white is really a lot brighter, and highlighting over top of this bright pearly paint effect that we've applied is difficult with a metallic paint. So just using very thin down matte white paint will help you to pick out the most extreme areas on the armor of this model. Take your time here, just find the areas that are most extreme, like the top of the hip here, and very slowly trace in those highlights on the model. Once we finished highlighting the model, I'm going back to the airbrush. This time I'm using Fog Gray. Again, 1 to 2 parts Airbrush Medium to our War Paints Fog Gray. And I'm going to focus this on the outer areas of the wings. I'm going to allow the previous color, Wolf Gray, to exist in the far outer areas of the wings. We're going to apply our final highlight through the airbrush, this time with Gorgon Hide, and this is the perfect tone to highlight up our Fog Gray and Wolf Gray colors. I'm just going to pick out the most extreme areas on these wings and make sure I get a nice gradient of this Gorgon Hide into the Fog Gray and Wolf Gray. Now, the airbrush is a great tool to help you save time and get really awesome effects, but what I really love is a combination of techniques. When you apply the airbrush along with washing and dry brushing techniques, you get some really simple but really effective results. Now I'm going to be applying Quick Shade Blue Tone across all of the wings. I'm gonna cover the wings very evenly and ensure that this wash works its way into the recesses, as you can see here, just around these bigger feathers in the middle of the wings. And I'm going to make sure that it doesn't pool up a bit too much. If it does begin to pool, just take your brush while it's still wet and still has some of that wash on there and pull the paint out of those deep dark recesses. Go ahead and apply this all over the wings. Give it about 20 minutes to dry, and then you can move on to the next step. We're going back to Gorgon Hide, and again, the moderate dry brush from the Masterclass Drybrush range, and very lightly and very gently, I am just applying a very simple highlight, allowing those deeper, darker tones to exist in the recesses. Next, I'm going to take pure matte white, again with the moderate dry brush. There might still be a little bit of that Gorgon Hide on the brush. That's okay. It's really working in our favor to help blend these colors together, and I'm just applying a very subtle dry brush to the outer parts of the wings. You could go back and take a detail brush or a character brush and pick out these details even further, but I'm quite happy with the effect that we're getting with just these 2 dry brushes alone. It really all depends on how much time and effort you want to put into your models. With the dry brush complete, we're going to go ahead and start painting in the robes. This time I'm using Demonic Yellow from our War Paints range. This is one of my favorite colors from the range because Demonic Yellow, traditionally yellow paints are very difficult. They're tricky to work with because they have very weak pigments, but applying Demonic Yellow over top of our base tones of skeleton bone allows us to get very simple 1-coat coverage. Now, I'm applying this very thin down. If you need to and find that it's a little bit too translucent, too transparent, you can go back and apply a second thin down coat, just making sure that the first coat has had time to dry. I was able to achieve 1 simple coat with the Demonic Yellow, and because I'm going to be highlighting this up and I'm going to be using a wash to work its way into the recesses, I wasn't too concerned about applying a second coat here. But just take your time here. You don't want to get any of this yellow paint on the armor areas or the wings that you've previously painted. It'd be very difficult to go back and paint over those. So just very carefully, with very thin down paint, with lots of control, go ahead and block in all of the yellow robes on this Angel Ezeriel model. Once you're done with the yellow, it's time to apply a wash, and I'm going back to Quick Shade Mid Brown. Like I said earlier, I don't get the opportunity to use this color too often, so I was excited to put it to good work on this model. So we used it for the armor, and we're going to use it again here on the yellow robes. This reddish tone, the reddish hue to this wash lends itself really well to yellow paint. After I've allowed it some time to dry, I'm going back to our thinned down demonic yellow, and I'm just finding the raised areas, and I'm going to pick them out with this demonic yellow. When you apply the wash, it essentially adds a shade and some depth to the model. So this is almost like coloring inside the lines. We're coloring by numbers here. All of the areas where the wash has not settled on these robes, we're just going to go ahead and reestablish that yellow tone with our demonic yellow paint. Again, I always find it works better to use very thin down paint. Just find some clean water. You can see here I did go back and I wanted some more yellow on this model. I wanted to draw your eye to the head of the model. So I applied one strip of yellow hair on our Angel Ezeriel model. I think it's going to look really cool. We're going to move on to our next color. This time we're using Moon Dust to add a highlight to all of the yellow robes. I really love Moon Dust when painting yellow. It's a really nice, it's a very rich and highly saturated yellow. Even though it's a brighter yellow, it has great coverage. I'm just going around and finding the most extreme edges and areas of the robes, and I'm going to apply this on those more extreme areas. In some cases, like right here, I'm going to make sure that I fill in all of the yellow. I'm covering up the demonic yellow, and that's okay because it's adding a nice highlight and we're adding some gradation to these robes. In some cases, you are going to want to use the edge of the brush to apply a nice edge highlight. Like here up on the hair, I'm just going to take the side of the brush and I'm going to trace that Moon Dust paint all the way down the ridges of this piece of hair. The last step in painting up our yellow is adding an extreme highlight of Arid Earth. This is a really great color. It's very similar to a skeleton bone. I actually use this quite often to highlight skeleton bone, but it's a perfect color for highlighting yellow as well. This time I'm just finding the hardest edges on these robes and I'm just tracing in, and in some cases edge highlighting this Arid Earth to really push the contrast on the yellow robes on this model. These are the brightest tones on this model. It is somewhat desaturated because we have so many variations of white on the armor, the ivory armor, and then the bluish white wings. So I really wanted to focus and spend extra time on these robes because this is where your eye is going to be drawn most when you look at the model. So just very carefully with very thin down paint, we're going to take this Arid Earth and we're just going to find the most raised areas, the more extreme areas on the model, and we're going to pick them out so that we can really push the contrast and create a visually stunning yellow on this model. One thing that I really love about painting miniatures is the imagination that you can impart into your models and the diversity that you can build up. Who says that your skin tone has to match your own? Maybe you can paint your model with purple skin because they come from a different planet, or maybe you're a Lego fan or a Simpsons fan or an emoji fan and you can paint their skin and flesh tones bright yellow. I'm going to be painting up a dark skin tone using a recipe that I've developed here in the Army Painter Studio on this Angel Ezeriel model. Before I painted in any of the skin tones, I did want to go ahead and pick out the pupils of the eyes. This is the only thing I'm going to do to the eyes. I'm going to apply some Gorgon hide because we already had it. I'm going to allow that to dry, and then I'm going to go right to my skin tone. When painting darker skin tones, I really like this werewolf fur because it's a grayish brown tone. It stands up really well to applying washes, whether you're going to apply a dark tone. In this case, I'm going to be applying quick shade purple tone because it gives a very realistic tonality to this darkened brown skin. So I'm very carefully with very thin down paint, I'm applying this to the face of our angel here, making sure that I don't paint over the eyes that I just painted in Gorgon hide. Just very carefully, you don't want to ruin any of the work that you've already done. Apply this werewolf fur to all of the skin on the model. To save some time, I'm going to be applying the same wash to the skin tones as I am the hair. So I'm going to go ahead and block in the hair, this time with Necromancer Cloak, which is a nice, rich, dark gray color. The reason we start with gray when I'm trying to paint black hair is because when you paint black to start, it's harder to pick out the contrast and the details with a wash. So very carefully, I'm applying this Necromancer Cloak to the rest of the hair, ensuring that I leave that yellow strand of hair on the model. Once that's done, we're going to apply our quick shade purple tone, and we're just going to apply this all over the face, even into the sockets of the eyes. It'll give the eyes a nice glowing effect. and then all of the gray parts of the black hair that we're painting. Just make sure to not get any of this purple tone on the yellow parts of the hair that you've previously painted or the armor. Once the wash is time to dry, I'm going back to werewolf fur, and I'm just picking out, this is a very small and a very fragile model, so these details are very finite, very small, so very carefully I'm just going to find the raised areas on the skin, like the brow, the cheeks, the top of the nose, and the lips on our Angel Ezeriel model. And then we're going to apply one more highlight, this time with tanned flesh. I was using a character brush. Usually I think I would like to use a detail brush, and I probably should have used a detail brush for this to really make it easier on myself when I was painting in these highlights. But just very simply pick out the most extreme areas of the face with that tanned flesh. Then we'll be taking Necromancer Cloak, and we're going to reestablish the highlights on the hair after we applied that quick shade purple tone. Very simply just taking the edge of the brush and running along the ridges of the hair. I like to use thin down paint. You don't want it to be too thin because then it starts to behave a little bit like a wash. You still want to have some surface tension in your paints when you're applying these highlights. So just go ahead and trace the edge of the brush along the raised areas of the hair. We're going to apply our final highlight to the hair, this time using Dungeon Gray. Now you could push this even further with another highlight of Ash Gray or even the Gorgon Hide, but you got to be careful when you're painting black hair that if you push it too white and too bright, that the hair begins to not look like black hair any longer. Now we're going to move on to painting in all of the metallic areas on the model. I'm just going to paint this very simply, just very easy. I'm not even going to highlight most of the metals on this model because the focal point really is the face of this model, that rich dark skin, the black hair, the yellow stripe of hair and the yellow robes. That's going to be the focal point. That's where your eyes are going to be drawn. So first I'm going to apply just one thin coat of true copper to areas that I want to have a gold appearance. Areas like these decorative items that are hanging down from her waist and this piece on her abdomen. I think it's an armor plate here on her abdomen, and these little coins that she has up here on her chest piece. Then I'm going to take bright gold and I'm just going to paint this inside of the areas that I previously painted true copper. Again, very simple. This is almost like a pre-highlight. I'm going to apply a wash later, and that'll help to pick out the rest of the details. Just very simply, we're going to apply some bright gold, and we're going to work this into the upper areas of the areas that we want to be painted gold on this model. Don't forget to pick out this little bit of gold that we have applied to her spear. Next, we're going to be taking gunmetal, and we're going to apply this to all of the remaining metallic areas on the model, like these decorative pieces. I'm not even sure what these are. Hanging from her waist, they look quite heavy, must make her job a lot more difficult when she's flying across the battlefield. We're of course going to paint in the spear tip and the spear handle in our gunmetal. Then we're going to apply a wash just to tone it all back down. This time I'm using quick shade dark tone. And very simply, right out of the bottle, I'm going to apply this to all the areas, ensuring that I don't get this, of course, on the armor or the yellow that we've previously painted. We don't want to ruin all of that hard work. So just very carefully apply this all over the metal areas, even the gold areas on the model. Again, I wanted to go for a very simple and easy metallic effect. I don't want to distract from the rest of the hard work that we did on the focal points on the model. Again, the hair, the face, and the robes. We're going to apply this to all of the metallic areas and just give it about 15 to 20 minutes to dry. Once it's had time to dry, we're just going to pick out some highlights, this time using shining silver. Just very simple. Some of these more extreme areas on the model, the areas that are popping out, just the bottom of these little tokens here on her chest plate, and some of the insignias on her abdomen armor, her belly armor here. Just going to apply just very little bit of shining silver, nothing too crazy here. All told, I was able to paint this model in less than an hour, and you should be able to as well if you follow the steps in this tutorial. This is what I call tabletop ready with just a little bit extra. So go ahead and pick out some details. Careful not to get your shining silver on any other areas of the model that you previously painted. We're just going to pick out some of the top areas here on the spear and call it a day. And here she is, Angel Ezeriel, the true Sayer from the Raging Heroes miniature line. I really loved how this turned out. I hope you enjoyed learning how to paint yellow robes, feathers, and dark skin tones in this tutorial today. I had a great time painting this up, and I hope that you apply some of these techniques to your models, and be sure to share them with us on Facebook. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial as much as I enjoyed painting up this Raging Heroes model for you today. Remember that the magic in miniature painting is that it can be as simple or as challenging as you want it to be, but with the right techniques, you're sure to achieve some great results. We'll see you next time.